Hello watch enthusiasts! Now today in my second instalment of my Baselworld 2018 coverage of brand releases, and my third if you include my small manufacturer meetings video, which I produced before that, this comes in as the third. And this is a video in which I'd like to talk about the interesting dress watches which were released specifically at this show, and the ones which have caught my eye specifically from the more well-known brands, and the ones which people have been talking about. And so, first of all I'd like to start with Omega, with the Seamaster 1948 limited editions. And these are pieces which I think are absolutely wonderful. They're brilliant recreations of vintage pieces, and though relatively pricey, they do make for fantastic looking timepieces, with a style which is remarkable by comparison to other models in Omega's range. And it would be really brilliant to see these in their standard range in sometime in the future. Whilst this is a range of two timepieces, they do share quite a great deal. They both have 38mm fully polished stainless steel cases with the broader lugs of late 1940s Seamasters, though one of them does look more like a 50s Seamaster than the 1948 edition. And these are designed to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Seamaster range, which is a remarkable achievement for a model to last that long in a manufacturer's range, and it's really wonderful to be able to witness this design recreated. I like the fact they've retained the 38mm size as well, which is very true to the originals. They both also feature silver dials with polished applied markers, though the forms of these are very different, and they also feature domed sapphire crystals and an 18-karat gold Omega logo at 12 o'clock, which only adds to the style of elegance and decoration on these timepieces. However, there are two different variants, the first being the earlier model, which is more expensive, which is the version with the small seconds. And this version features a 60-metre water resistance like the other one, and is 11.65mm thick, which is slightly thicker than the other one, due to this additional complication. It also features a brown calf leather strap, and these wonderful leaf-style hands, which I think work extremely well with the railway-style minute markers along the very edge of the dial. Internally, this watch features the caliber 8804, which is effectively a version of their 8800, which incorporates the small seconds. And these watches are automatic, and this may be something which some people don't like, because of course manual watches were more in keeping with those timepieces, but nonetheless it's an additional aid to someone who wants to wear this watch every day. And the second version is the one which looks slightly newer, on a blue leather strap, which I think also looks tremendous, in this case a version with Dauphine hands. And of course these feature central seconds, which is something that isn't seen on the other version, and is significantly later in the Omega range. Likewise, the indices are sharper and far more inspired by the 1950s, which is something which will appeal to some and not to others, but I think looks great. Likewise, this is a more balanced style than the other version, but perhaps loses a bit of the original charm. And this version features the same applied 12, 3, 6 and 9, but no longer features the large open plane of the dial, in favour of having the minute markers closer into the centre of the dial. Likewise, the text is spread out across the dial as a result of not having those small seconds, and internally this features the caliber 8806, thanks to the inclusion of the seconds in the centre, being the only difference here. Also, this is slightly slimmer at 11.2mm, but shares the 60-metre water resistance of its brother, and thus as a result makes it quite a functional daily wearer, where you shouldn't worry about washing your hands whilst wearing this timepiece. Now the case backs of these watches are somewhat divisive, because some would have preferred to simply have a hippocampus stamped onto the back of the case back, or some sort of medallion, whilst others like what they've fitted, which is a sapphire crystal to the back of these watches, so you can examine the very beautifully finished movements within. These casebacks also feature a Chris Craft boat and a Gloucester Meteor, both applications in areas where these watches, or at least the Seamaster line, have been used, and so to draw on the inspiration and history of Omega. And this is something which again some people will like and some people won't, but it certainly gives a very attractive view into the back of these watches. And the price for these watches will vary, so the central second version will be 5,700 Swiss francs, whilst the 8804 powered small second version, which is my personal favourite, will be 6,200, making very interesting options for those looking for a luxury dress watch, which is different and something off the beaten track, but something that will, I think, appeal to a great many people, and which offers something beautiful and very reliable on the wrist. Now, if you rather fancied one of those Omegas but simply find them too pricey, or indeed you fancy a vintage-inspired dress watch with a Swiss build and historical credentials, but with a manually wound movement, then Tissot may well have answered your plight. Because this is the Tissot Heritage 2018, and this is a timepiece which is rather curious in its design. because it's a watch which takes inspiration from 1943, but has grown to 42mm in diameter to accommodate the Unitas 6497, which sits inside it, which is a period-correct movement, albeit slightly newer than that. It's very much a movement which takes inspiration from that era, and which is universally recognised as a very well-made and an extremely robust movement for a watch that's manually wound with small seconds. And the design of this watch is very interesting, albeit its 42mm size is perhaps a bit large for some. The view through the caseback is fantastic, with Geneva stripes and decoration throughout its movement. Likewise, the dial is beautifully finished with a vertical brushing across it, and then a rotary brushing on the small seconds, which sit at 6 o'clock, rather near the bottom of the dial, in a similar way to a pocket watch. Now, the leaf hands lend to a really wonderful presentation of the watch, with Antimagnetique and Tissot on it, which gives you an idea of the way this watch is designed to work. Likewise, it has a domed crystal on it, and the case is wonderfully faceted, in a way which simply wouldn't be seen today in terms of design, whilst the dial appears simple, yet by no means boring, which is great to see. Furthermore, the crown is a really wonderful piece, and something which I assume will have been neglected to talk about in some cases by some, just because it's not a very big detail of this watch. But it really does appeal to me in the way it's curved over its top with Tissot on it, as well as a very slim profile, which just seems perfect for this timepiece, with a nice execution matching the sharp lines of the dial on the Tissot logo, as well as the fact that the rounded nature of it does match those leaf hands wonderfully. The watch does also incorporate an element of anti-magnetism to it, which is great to see, especially with a very large exhibition caseback. And so, for a circa €1,000 price tag, this watch seems like a very attractive option for someone who wants a vintage-inspired dress watch, which isn't the usual ETA 2824-powered affair, but rather something very inspiringly designed, and with a beautifully decorated, manually wound movement to give a certain amount of sophistication to this timepiece. And so it is a tremendous option for someone who wants something simple, old-fashioned, but nonetheless contemporary in terms of being available to use for any sort of occasion, and suitable for any sort of attire. Also coming in the grand scheme of things at a more affordable price range is the Seiko Presage SJE 073. And this is a timepiece which is a limited edition of 1881, and does come in at a slightly higher price than the Tissot, but still should be affordable for those who still don't want to go as high as, for example, that Omega, or indeed into the realms of high horology. And this piece costs $2,200, and for that you get a beautifully finished, Zaratsu finished style of stainless steel case, with a wonderful polished side, as well as brushed elements on the top of the lugs and around the bracelet. And this version doesn't come in titanium, unlike the watch which looks rather similar to it, which is another Presage model with the same textured metallic dial, which makes for a wonderful effect in terms of the view of the front of this watch, with extremely precisely cut and beveled hands, and then a blued second hand. And the dial base of this watch is a fantastic metallic form, which of course we have seen before, but is nonetheless refreshing in this case, with those applied and faceted indices above them, which match the hands beautifully, and the applied Seiko logo, in addition to the raised chapter ring. And the detailing on this watch is phenomenal, from that Zaratsu polishing I've described, as well as the crown, which has the Seiko S cut into it very, very deeply. And then, of course, the form of sharpened edges, which are so typical of Seiko these days. And the beauty of this watch comes in the way the whole thing works together with that bracelet, which is excellently finished in brushed and polished elements, in order to create a strangely sporty effect, which in another watch would appear sporty, but in the case of this Seiko, simply makes this watch appear far more technological in its elegance. And this means you get a watch which is both a dress watch but also an everyday all-rounder with 100-metre water resistance. And the movement inside this watch is the calibre 6L35, which has a 45-hour power reserve, and enables the watch to be particularly slim at only 9.8mm, despite having all of this decoration on the case. And this case is stainless steel, of course, not titanium, but I would say this is of little concern when the finishing is so superb. And what I like most about this watch is the fact that it's able to compete with Swiss watches in a way which isn't competition directly, but rather is a form of alternative. Because the design of this watch is so typically Japanese, from its forms, its shapes, the precision of its design, and likewise into the bracelet with its elegance of form, but also in the fact that this watch is a timepiece offering something very different, It doesn't have the high beat rate one sees in some Swiss watches, but instead it features a quality of finishing which is superb. And it chose separate priorities like a slightly longer power reserve than the equivalent ETA, which is again great to see. And so I think this limited edition of 1881, sold for $2,200 each, would make a fantastic addition to any collection, whether one enjoys Japanese watches or simply wants something quintessentially Japanese and Seiko for one's collection. Now, one other watch from the Seiko group which really caught my eye was the Grand Seiko High Beat 36000 VFA SBGGH 265, 267 and 266. And these are versions of their automatic high beat movement models, but these are designed to commemorate the 20th anniversary of their 9S range of movements. And these watches are beautifully manufactured, they really are wonderfully made, and they do show themselves as being a rung above the Seiko Presage line. Now I'll speak about these models generally before I speak about any individual one in particular, because there are 3 versions. And these all feature a 39.5mm by 13mm case, which means they're very wearable for the vast majority of wrist sizes, and shouldn't be a problem for those who do have larger or smaller wrists, as they do have that very typical Seiko design. Likewise, the lugs extend quite a long way off the sides of the watch, which will make them wear a little bit larger, but also will allow you to wear the vast majority of straps with them without any concern for the strap rubbing on the case, which is often something which people complain about. Likewise, the cases feature the beautiful Zaratsu finishing, polishing rather, along their bevels and edges, which create a very complex form which is worlds away from other manufacturers in this style, and is an area which Seiko really commands. Likewise, there is brushing on the top of the lugs as well, to emphasise those polished surfaces, and create a far more interesting appearance for the owner. Internally, these watches are very clever as well, because they feature the caliber 9S85, which is, of course, an in-house Grand Seiko caliber with different executions depending on the version. And they feature MEMS fabricated skeletonized escape wheels and reservoir teeth on their escapement. And what this means is that the reservoirs are basically cuts into the teeth on the escape wheel. And what this enables the movement to do is to retain a certain lubrication in these areas and thus extend servicing. Likewise, the MEMS manufacturing means that there's high precision in the manufacturing of each part, and thus the power reserve can be increased, and the accuracy as well. The detailing on the dials of these watches is also absolutely breathtaking, with the traditional Dauphine-style hands from Seiko, or rather Grand Seiko in this case, cut off in this wonderful and breathtaking, really, when you get to see one of these in the flesh, style of bevels, which create these sword-like planes, which act extremely well in relation to the raised and applied surrounds, to the markers as well as the date window. Then the dial finishing is extremely crisp, for example with this model, the white dial version, with the platinum dial. And this version of course features that blued hand, and is a limited edition of 20 pieces rather than the 1500 pieces seen in the steel version, or indeed the 150 pieces in the gold model. And as you can see, this really is a wonderful looking timepiece, and both the gold and the platinum versions come on leather straps, whilst the steel version with the blue dial comes on its metal bracelet. Then one moves into the gold variant, and the gold variant is yellow gold and is by far the brightest of these models, with that very bright finishing on the case in Seiko's gold colour. The dial remains white and remains very tastefully executed, and retains depth, which is difficult to achieve often with these satinated styles of white dials. Though the one thing that does bother me about this is the fact that the dial has special on it, which seems like a fairly nondescript piece of writing, and I think cheapens the appearance of the watch as a whole. Though nonetheless, it's a magnificent looking timepiece, and of course the innovation that Seiko puts into these watches is always superb. Of course, the gold version of this watch is more rare and more expensive than the steel version, with only 150 of these pieces to be manufactured, each costing $27,000, which certainly is a jump in price, but for those who like a gold watch, this is comparable to something like a Rolex Day-Date, and really it's nice to have an alternative to one of those in this format. Now the final I'd like to talk about of these 3 is the steel version, and this version is the blue dial model, still retaining those motifs engraved into the dial, and the wonderful execution of the hands and indeed the indices. However, here we see a gold Grand Seiko logo, and a gold Grand Seiko hand as well, and this gives a certain variety to the coloration, and in my eyes is the most beautiful execution there is. And of course this model is limited to 1500 pieces rather than the 20 of the platinum, or the 150 of the gold, and also likewise the price reflects this. The movement is also beautifully decorated, as you can see, with one of their full circle rotors, rather than one of the decorated gilded rotors. Here we have a blue one in that full circle, in typical Grand Seiko style, which I personally like because I feel it's typical of the brand, and really does symbolise their way of doing things. Now, one watch I feel I should include in this list is the Tudor 1926. And this is a watch which, I must say, I'm completely against. And I think it's a shame, because Tudor could have made a really interesting option with this timepiece. But I feel that all they've ended up creating is a watch which is remarkably expensive for what it offers, and unfortunately doesn't offer anything particularly different, and nothing particularly attractive, I feel, to a prospective buyer, other than its looks. And I think this is a shame, because Tudor can make some really phenomenal watches, as I've said in the dive watch video about the 58. They're fantastic watches. It's just a shame this watch, I think, fell short. And this timepiece comes in four variants, a 28mm version with an ETA 2671, and then a 36, 39 and 41mm set of versions, which all have ETA 2824s in them. The watches themselves are stainless steel or two-tone, the two-tone having the gold bezel, as well as these golden finished elements on the bracelet. And likewise, the dials are available either in their conventional style with this sort of waffle effect to the centre of the dial, and then this run around the edge in a flattened section. And these are available in silver, or indeed in black with gold elements. But these are also available with diamonds on every other marker, to add a certain amount of lustre to these watches, though I must admit I don't think a watch with an ETA 2824 really is the right place to put diamonds. Now, prices for this 100-metre water-resistant watch vary between £1,220, which is the variant at the bottom of the range, being the 28mm version in full steel without any diamonds, up to £2,450 for the two-tone version with diamonds on the dial in the full 41mm size. And the pricing for this watch is neither here nor there. Personally, I think it's too high for what they're offering. I think brands such as Zinn, for example, or Larco offer infinitely more for the same price range, which I think is a shame. And I feel that with this watch, Tudor were resting on their laurels and indeed their brand name, which, as I've said, is a real shame, because there's no limit to the admiration I have for Tudor and how much I like some of their watches. For example, the Black Bay is an absolutely phenomenal timepiece, and the Heritage Ranger, despite the fact that I've ended up deciding to sell mine simply because I'm after a particular new model, not necessarily from this brand, but certainly a new model. I think they produce brilliant watches, so it's certainly a shame to see this go. Now, Nomos have released a number of really beautifully decorated and designed timepieces for Baselworld, and the one which struck me as the most interesting amongst their dress watches is the new Nomos Tangente Neomatic 41. And this version takes inspiration from the usual Bauhaus style they take. However, it uses a new movement in order to give really useful features to the buyer, and a display which is so phenomenally Nomos in its design, that really this is the ultimate Nomos in my eyes. And it features the traditional style of sharply curving down lugs seen on the Tangente, and the fully polished case, as well as that beautiful crown and simple white silver-plated dial. The hands aren't blued in this case, but rather are black in the case of the central hands and the small seconds at 6 o'clock, in order to match the rest of the decoration on the dial, whilst there is also Neomatic and made in Germany in gold. Now, whilst the watch is advertised as the 41, it is in fact only 40.5mm wide, which means it's a very wearable size for the vast majority of people. And also, unlike the Orion, for example, with its longer lugs, this has much shorter, more stubby and curved down lugs, which means that it'll be more versatile and more wearable for the vast majority of people, unlike something like the Orion, which, though a gorgeous design, is perhaps more carefully designed for those with wider wrists, rather than those with smaller wrists. And this also allows, this larger size rather, allows the dial to appear clean without becoming cluttered or busy. It's also only 7.9mm thick, making it very wearable for the vast majority of people, and a brilliant option as far as dress watches go. Likewise, its steel case will be durable and wear well. Despite only having a water resistance of 50 metres, it is purely a dress watch, so that's no real concern. And the caliper 6101 inside it, being only 3.6mm thick, provides you with a fantastic amount of functionality, with an automatic winding setup, a decent length power reserve, and the small seconds at 6 o'clock. Likewise, it has a very different and interesting display for the date. And pointer dates are interesting options on watches, but can appear slightly cluttering of the dial. However, this has an interesting solution to that. Around the dial runs the track for the date, and on either side of the selected date we see a red fill on each of those holes perforated through the dial. And this allows you to be able to see the date very quickly and easily, and also can be set forward or backwards, which is something that isn't normally seen on watches and allows you to set the date much more quickly than if you had to cycle through the full set of 31 days. Now, speaking of the movement itself, this really is a beautiful device, with fantastic decoration over it, blued screws, and of course Nomos' proprietary swing system, which is their own escapement, which is particularly difficult to manufacture, and rare for a manufacturer as small as Nomos to be able to offer such an interesting advance in their manufacturing. And this, I think, comes together to produce a really very, very interesting watch for $4,100 which will be the full price of this watch. And though this comes somewhat above the other steel versions from Nomos, I think this will be a very, very interesting option for someone who wants a single dress watch, for example, or for someone who particularly enjoys clean design, because this really is as clean as you can get, while still offering complication and a very German style of design, which I think is very characterful and very appealing. Now, one watch I've been particularly keen to talk about is the Glashutte Original Senator Cosmopolite. And this model is now available in steel, and it was released originally a couple of years ago, actually 3 years ago I think, in gold. And that cost €38,000, and that's certainly no small sum. But now it is available in steel at about 2/3 the price of that, at €20,700 to €21,000, depending on the strap you go for. And the reason why I'm interested in this watch is that though it's a large watch at 44mm by 14mm thick, it's a really glorious looking piece in terms of what it offers to the buyer, as far as complication goes, and as far as how beautiful and well decorated the movement is. And this is a watch which truly is for the traveller, and it's very much on the border of the dress watch and moving into the casual watch area, and that's thanks to its very imposing size. But the watch itself is really a stainless steel watch with brushed and polished surfaces, and a very circular form with small lugs which jut out. The dial itself is white and very, very well decorated with blued elements for the indices as well as those hands, which are those wonderful forms which make them remarkably legible. And the functions of this watch are very varied. So it's a 50-metre water-resistant watch, so really you'll only want to be washing your hands with it. But this all comes from the complications, because it has hours, minutes and small seconds as its main functions, of course. It also has home time, but also the ability to choose between 36 different time zones. And similarly, it has the split date with those two wheels. In addition to these complications, it also features a day-night indicator, which is extremely useful when it displays different time zones based upon where they are in the world, using that additional crown. And as you can see, these are seen through the small windows on the 8 o'clock position. But in addition to that, it does have a day-night indicator to make it much easier to tell where you are. And then, of course, you have the power reserve indicator at 12 o'clock, which gives you an idea of where you stand. But of course, this watch is powered by a beautiful movement, a really magnificent piece, which is the caliber 8902, which is a 63 dual movement with a glorious micro-rotor and phenomenal decoration throughout, which is frankly baffling. And I must say, for me at least, and this is a personal preference, it's by no means gospel, but I personally do appreciate these brands who are willing to compromise the case material, in this case moving to steel rather than gold, in favour of a really wonderful movement, which is what's been done here. And so, though this isn't a completely new package, I really did want to talk about this today because it's a beautiful looking timepiece despite its size, which has so much complication for the price of, for example, a gold Rolex Submariner. And of course, those are very, very different watches, but it's fantastic to be able to see something like this at that price range and available from a reputable brand with really brilliant quality and great attention to detail. Now, the penultimate watch I'd like to talk about is the Laurent Ferrier Minute Repeater School Piece. And this is a very, very interesting piece because, of course, it's created by Laurent Ferrier, who are a brand who I have the utmost respect for. They're a very interesting brand who are consistently able to make beautifully designed and very cleverly engineered pieces, which have a design which is so typically classic, yet their mechanical innovation and care with these timepieces is unrivaled in my eyes. Now, this watch here is the first minute repeater by the brand, and it really is a magnificent sight. So the watch is designed around this 40mm case, which is 14.2mm thick. But I think despite this thickness, it works rather well, as a result of the fact that the case is very heavily rounded, which makes it feel more like a pocket watch on the wrist. Likewise, the pumpkin-style crown is just a fantastic addition to this watch, and works very well to mirror the case shape, but in different position. The lugs also extend very, very well, but with a certain weight and strength, which is also seen in that crown and that case design, and so the whole design works extraordinarily well together. Now, the case itself is stainless steel, but the dial is this wonderful salmon red-gold style of application on a brushed base. Likewise, Laurent, Ferrier and Genève are the only parts written on the dial, and leave the dial very much uncluttered and beautifully clear. Furthermore, the indices are applied and mirror the forms of the hands in a curving and swaying form, along with the small dots around the edge of the dial, which are reminiscent of a Patek Philippe Calatrava, which of course is rather curious because Laurent Ferrier himself worked at Patek Philippe for well over 30 years. At the bottom of the dial there is then this silvered and wonderfully recessed small seconds marker, and this sub-dial allows the watch to appear all the more balanced, I think, and does again play off that pocket watch sort of vibe this watch has, with extremely good legibility, which is uncharacteristic really for a dress watch of this type. Then, of course, on the flank of the case, we have the switch for the minute repeater, and this is, of course, a new technology for the brand, but I think has been executed extremely well with their caliber 707.01, which has an 80-hour power reserve and is, of course, a manually wound movement. Now, the movement of the watch, however, is the part of the watch which I like the most. It's a really wonderfully designed movement to look truly gorgeous, and which is, of course, manually wound, which is great to see with such a nicely designed crown, because, of course, one will be using it very regularly. And it's a 32 jewel caliber running at 3 Hz, with beautiful striping going down the movement, and a balance wheel placed down by the bottom of the movement. Then, of course, one can see a lot of the components thanks to cut-out bridges, and whilst one sees the spring barrel and the balance wheel on the one side, on the other side you see the minute repeater assembly. And there we see motifs such as a musical note, which just adds to the design of this as a really well considered and well thought out movement. Likewise, it allows you a brilliant look at the strikers for the minute repeater, and of course the switch mirrors the shape of those on the side of the case. And so as a whole, I think this is an absolutely wonderful looking timepiece, and of course Laurent Ferrier are a brand which is only growing in terms of the respect people have for it. And I must admit, my knowledge of Laurent Ferrier had been relatively limited until a few months ago, but it's really wonderful to be able to see such beautiful creations from a brand which is relatively unknown by the vast majority of people. And we don't yet know the price of this watch or the availability, but suffice to say that I suspect it will be rather costly, but I really wanted to show it today just for its sheer beauty and its elegance. Now, the final watch I'd like to talk about is a real design classic from Patek Philippe, and this is the Golden Ellipse. And the Golden Ellipse has now been produced for 50 years, and it's a piece which has become really iconic as far as Patek Philippe's designs go, but it's often gone unrecognised, which I think is a bit of a shame, because it's one of those designs which I think are enduring and highly elegant. And they're celebrating the 50th anniversary with the reference 5738R. And this model features a large case with a 34.5mm width by 39.5mm in length. And this makes it somewhat larger than some previous iterations, though they have made a platinum version of this for about 10 years now. And as a result, this is a piece which is more wearable perhaps than the older versions, but still retains that iconic form and that cabochon on the crown, which here is made of onyx to mirror the black anthracite colour of the dial. And speaking of the dial is this wonderful anthracite sunburst effect dial, which goes extremely well with the strap and of course that cabochon which they've added on. And the colour of this is very cold, but I think it's matched very, very nicely by the fact that the indices are extremely simple and they're pink gold. And this is matched by the pink gold case as well, which just adds to the elegance, I think, of this watch as a whole piece, and creates a timepiece which is timeless in its design, but nonetheless is very clearly a dress watch, and couldn't be more classically correct. Now, the movement inside this watch is very, very well chosen, because it's the caliber 240. And this is a movement which has 27 jewels, and it's an automatic three-hand movement from Patek Philippe. And it's extremely slim at 2.53mm thick, and thus fits into this case very, very well, whilst keeping the height of the watch down, which is exactly what you want with a watch where the lugs are hooded beneath the case. And the one elegant feature of this is that the movement only runs at 3 Hz, and normally this would create a stutter in the second hand, but of course this watch doesn't have one, and so as a result they can use this low beat rate to extend the power reserve to 48 hours, and make the watch all the more wearable for someone who wants to use this every day, and make it really their daily wearer. Now, the availability of this watch hasn't yet been stated, but it will cost 27,200 Swiss francs, which is certainly a large amount of money for a watch like this, and a simpler watch as this, but for those Patek Philippe aficionados, this will be a very interesting piece to pick up, and something really very timeless in design, which will never go out of fashion in my eyes. Anyway, I'll conclude the video here, but do tell me in the comments down below what you thought of these various dress watches, and if there was a particular favourite you had, because these are very personal watches, of more varied forms perhaps than dive watches, and so as a result I certainly am interested to hear what you think. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel, and to be able to enjoy more content here in future, as well as the rest of my Baselworld coverage, which will be coming up. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm on the Watch Guy, out.